I am Amira. I was born and raised in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in a home governed by the strict teachings of Islam. My father, a devout and unwavering man, ruled our house with the discipline of a general. Each day was filled with rituals, the 5 prayers, fasting during Ramadan, memorizing the Quran, and the endless list of rules that shaped every aspect of my life. The tone of her voice softens, reflecting the complexity of her past. I wore my hijab proudly, not because I understood the significance of it, but because it was all I knew. From a very young age, I learned to recite the Quran. I was a good Muslim, at least that's what I thought I was. But deep within me, there was always a restlessness, a sense of discomfort that I couldn't shake. Something inside me asked, is this all there is? Is this what God wants from me? Is there more to this? She pauses, the emotion lingering. I couldn't voice my doubts. I wasn't allowed to. It wasn't even a thought I dared to entertain. I was raised to follow without question. But over the years, as I grew older, I began to wonder. I felt something missing. I would lay awake at night and wonder, is God just a set of rules? Or is there something beyond all of this? Her voice cracks slightly, the heaviness of the truth she carries visible in her tone. And that's when it all changed, when everything I knew was turned upside down by one single vivid dream. Before the dream, my life was just ordinary. It was predictable. I knew my place, I knew my role, and I knew the rules. My father's voice was the voice of authority in our house, and his word was final. I didn't question him. I couldn't. To do so would be unthinkable, not just to my father, but to my whole family, to our community. Her voice becomes reflective, almost distant, as she paints the picture of her upbringing. I grew up surrounded by the chants of prayers, the sound of the call to prayer echoing throughout the house, marking every part of my day. There was always fasting during Ramadan, memorizing verses from the Quran, and the ritual of saying prayers 5 times a day. And in the midst of it all, I wore my hijab proudly, just as my mother and sisters did. It was who I was. It was my identity. She pauses again, as if reliving those days. I believed in Islam, but not because I truly understood it. I believed because it was what I was taught. It was all I had ever known. But even then, there were moments when I would lie awake at night, overwhelmed by a question I couldn't answer. Is this it? Is this all that there is to faith? Is God just a set of rules? Her tone shifts slightly, the tension of her past palpable. And then came the dream, a dream that felt too real to just be a dream. It shook me in a way I never thought possible. It shattered everything I had ever known about my faith, about my life, and about myself. It happened during the last 10 days of Ramadan. I had been fasting, praying more than usual, and reading the Quran constantly. I felt spiritually connected, but at the same time, I felt an emptiness I couldn't explain. One night, as I lay in bed, exhausted from the long days of prayer, I fell into a deep sleep. Her voice quivers as she recounts the dream. In the dream, I was standing in a vast desert, but not a desert like the one I knew. This one glowed with an unnatural light. The sky was different. The air was thick with a strange kind of energy. I couldn't place it, but it felt sacred. And then, he appeared. She pauses, a deep breath escaping her lips, as if trying to gather herself. He wore a robe as white as snow, his face radiant, his eyes filled with an indescribable love and compassion. I was frozen in place, unable to look away. My heart was pounding in my chest, and yet I was drawn to him. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but he looked at me with such tenderness, such understanding. And then he spoke. Her voice softens, but there is a weight to her words. He said my name, Amira. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. And then he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. She shudders slightly at the memory, still processing the impact. I knew those words. I had heard them before, from a Christian girl in school, but hearing them now, coming from his lips, from the mouth of this man in white, it hit me like a wave. And then, he said something that shattered everything in me. Her voice cracks, barely above a whisper. He said, I died for you. Those words echoed through me like 1,000 voices. I fell to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. My heart felt as if it was being torn open, revealing something new, something I had never felt before. She takes a shaky breath, her emotions evident. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and warmth flooded through my entire body. It was as if the pain, the confusion, the emptiness I had been carrying all my life was suddenly filled with peace, with love. When I woke up, I was screaming. My heart was racing. My mind was spinning. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew it was real. I couldn't deny it. I couldn't ignore it. And yet, I tried to. I told no one. Not for days. I couldn't bring myself to speak of it, to share what had happened in that dream. Her voice trembles, the vulnerability clear in her words, but it wouldn't leave me. His name, Jesus, kept burning inside of me like fire. Every moment I felt the weight of it, pulling at me, drawing me in. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to believe it. It went against everything I had been taught, everything I knew. She pauses, taking a deep breath. I started to search for answers, secretly. I found a Christian website using a VPN and started reading the Bible. I read about Jesus, his love, his sacrifice, his forgiveness. I wept as I read, something inside of me breaking open in a way I had never experienced. And in those words, in those stories, I found something I had been searching for my entire life. I found peace. It wasn't easy. It wasn't safe. But I had to know. I had to understand. What had happened to me in that dream? Who was this man? What was this love, this peace that I had felt? I couldn't ignore it anymore. Her voice becomes more resolute. I continued reading the Bible in secret, late at night, when everyone else was asleep. I read in Arabic, trying to absorb every word. The more I read, the more I understood. Jesus, the man I had seen in my dream, wasn't just a prophet. He was the Son of God, and he had died for me, for my sins. The weight of that truth filled me with awe and wonder. She pauses, as if reliving the quiet, intense moments of those secret readings. And then one night, alone in my room, I whispered the words that changed everything. Jesus, I believe in you. I believe you are the Son of God. And in that moment, everything shifted. I was born again. But that was also the beginning of my torment. The morning after I whispered those words, Jesus, I believe in you, my world began to unravel. I was no longer the daughter my father had raised. I was no longer the obedient Muslim girl who followed every rule. I was something else in their eyes, something dangerous, something lost. She pauses, a weight hanging in the silence. It started with my brother. He found my browsing history. I had forgotten to clear it. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't have to. He just stared at me, his face full of disgust. And then, without a word, he went to my father. He told him everything. The secret searches, the Bible readings, all of it. Her voice trembles slightly, the horror still fresh in her memory. That night, I was dragged into the living room. My father's face was twisted in anger, his eyes filled with rage and disbelief. He didn't ask me if it was true. He didn't want an explanation. He didn't care about my side of the story. Her voice grows colder, as the memory of her father's wrath becomes real again. He just looked at me and said, "You are not my daughter." And then the beating began. Amira's voice breaks for a moment, and she pauses to steady herself. They hit me. My father, my brothers. They all took turns. I tried to block the blows, but they kept coming. My mother wouldn't speak to me. She stood there, watching as I was punished. She couldn't bear to even look at me. I was no longer her daughter. I was a disgrace. She breathes deeply, collecting herself. I was locked in my room for days. No food, no water. I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone. My family treated me like I was a monster, like I was diseased, like I had betrayed them. And in their eyes, I had. As the days passed, my father's anger didn't subside. He became more desperate, more determined to fix me. That's when they brought in the imam. Her voice becomes darker as she recalls the event. He came to perform a ruqya, an exorcism, to cleanse me of the jinn, the evil spirit he believed had taken over my body. They thought I was possessed. They thought Jesus had made me mad. They didn't understand. They didn't see. She shudders, remembering the coldness of the ritual. The imam came with his oils, his Quranic verses, and his fury. He shouted verses into my ears. He slapped my legs when I couldn't recite Surah al-Baqarah fast enough. His words echoed in my mind, but all I could hear was the voice of Jesus, his promise that he would never leave me, even in the darkness. Her voice grows quieter, a trace of pain lingering. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away, but I stayed silent. Jesus had warned me it would be like this. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. And so I endured. I held on to his name, even when everything around me was falling apart. There were nights when I didn't know if I would survive. The pain, the humiliation, it was unbearable. My father would pray outside my door, begging Allah to cleanse me, to remove the jinn. But nothing changed. I was still me. I still knew the truth. Her voice cracks as she recalls the depths of her despair. I had nothing left. No food, no water, no support. But I still had my faith. I still had Jesus. And I prayed to him every night. I whispered, "Jesus, if you are real, help me escape." Her voice softens, as if hearing Jesus' response once more. And then, one night, he spoke to me again, not in a dream, but in my spirit. His words were simple, but they gave me strength. "Hold on, Amira. I will make a way." She pauses for a moment, her breath shaky. The very next day, my cousin Illa came to visit. She was the only one in my family who had ever shown me any kindness. I didn't expect her to understand, but I couldn't keep it inside anymore. She looked at me, and without saying a word, she hugged me, and then she whispered, "I know what you believe. I know you saw him too." I froze. She knew. She had seen him too. Her voice quivers with disbelief as she remembers the shock of that revelation. Ila had been silently following Jesus for years, but she had never had the courage to speak out. She had kept her faith a secret, just as I had. But now, seeing me in such pain, she couldn't stay silent anymore. Her tone becomes more urgent, reflecting the excitement of this new discovery. She handed me a small device, something that looked like a USB stick, but it contained a full Arabic Bible and testimonies of people who had come to know Jesus in the same way I had. And that night, I read more. I devoured the scriptures. I read about Jesus' words, his life, and his love. His promises gave me hope again. I felt the fire of faith burning in me once more. That night, after reading the Bible, I felt a renewed strength in me. It was as if Jesus himself was there beside me, guiding me through the darkness. But even though I knew he was with me, I still feared what would happen next. My family had cast me out in every way, and now I felt as if I had nothing left. Her voice is tinged with the fear of the unknown. The next day, Ila came again. She had a look of determination in her eyes. She had bribed the housekeeper to unlock the door while my family was out. She wasn't going to leave me behind, not when I was suffering like this. Her voice becomes a bit more hopeful, a small glimmer of light piercing through the darkness. Ila wrapped me in a blanket, and with the little strength I had left, she helped me sneak out of the house. We didn't know where we were going, but we had to get away. We ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just wanted to be free. She takes a deep breath, the memory of the escape still vivid. She took me to a house on the outskirts of the city. It belonged to an Armenian Christian couple who secretly helped people like me, people who had been forced to flee their homes because of their faith. When they saw me, they gasped. I could barely stand, my legs swollen from the beatings, my ribs sore. I was weak, broken, but they took me in. They didn't ask questions. They just loved me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly cared for, like I mattered. Even in the safety of that house, I knew I couldn't stay long. My father had reported me missing, and the police were looking for me. He had told them I was mentally ill, that I had been radicalized by foreign Christians. His lies were convincing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the authorities would come knocking on that door. Her voice is full of fear, but there is a quiet resilience that shines through. So, I moved again and again, from safe house to safe house. Sometimes I stayed with strangers, sometimes in old churches. Each place felt like a fleeting hope, a temporary refuge. The police were still looking for me. They didn't know where I was, but they were relentless. She pauses, a sorrowful sigh escaping her lips. I couldn't stay in one place too long. I lived in constant fear. There were nights I would wake up to sirens outside and think, this is it. They've found me. My heart would race, and I would pray to Jesus, please carry me, help me. I can't do this alone. Her voice grows softer, almost as if in prayer. And then one night, I woke up to sirens, thinking they were coming for me. But it wasn't the police. It was an ambulance for someone else. That night I cried, knowing that I was still alive, but also knowing the price I had paid to stay that way. As time went on, the reality of my situation became even clearer. My family had erased me. My name was no longer on their records. My pictures were taken down from the walls. I was gone. I was dead to them. And that, in a way, was worse than the physical pain I had endured. It was as if I had never existed at all. Her voice becomes reflective, distant. One of my cousins told Illa later that if I ever returned, I would be buried alive. And the thought of that, of my family hating me so completely, of never being able to return home, was unbearable. But at the same time, I knew that there was no turning back. I had made my choice. I had chosen Jesus, and that choice had cost me everything. She takes a moment to steady herself. I lost my family, my culture, my name, my identity. But in return, I gained something far more precious. I gained a new life, a life with Jesus. And in the darkest moments, when I felt completely alone, he was there. He had never left me. Then came the moment when I knew I had to take the next step. I had to make a public declaration of my faith. I had to be baptized. But there was no church. There was no big ceremony. It was just me in a small house with a couple who had shown me kindness and love. Her voice softens, filled with tenderness as she recalls the sacred moment. The couple who had taken me in had a small bathtub. It wasn't anything fancy. There was no choir, no white robe, just me, a small candle, and a bucket of water. But that moment, when I went under the water, when I whispered, "I am yours, Lord, no matter what it costs," that moment was the most beautiful, the most profound moment of my life. Her voice is filled with peace, but also with the weight of what came next. But peace doesn't mean the danger is over. 2 days after my baptism, someone reported me. We never found out who. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe a family member who betrayed me. But the police came. They came, banging on the door, demanding to know where I was. The couple hid me under the floorboards. I lay there holding my breath as the officers searched the house. They didn't find me, but they warned the couple, "If we find out you're hiding converts, you will pay." Her voice trembles as she recalls the narrow escape. After they left, we knew I couldn't stay. It was too dangerous. I had to leave the country. There was no future for me in Saudi Arabia. Not as a Christian, not as someone who had betrayed her family, her religion, her blood. But escaping wasn't simple. I had no passport, no identity. My family had erased me from existence. I was nothing, a ghost. Her voice grows heavier as she recalls the final act of betrayal and hope. But Illa, God bless her, contacted a Christian underground network. They arranged to smuggle me out, not by plane, but through the desert, on foot, at night. We crossed the border in the dead of night, hidden from view, each step a gamble with death. She breathes deeply, the tension of the journey still fresh in her voice. I still have the small New Testament that they gave me. It's torn, faded, but it's the most precious thing I own. We walked for hours, praying, fearing for our lives, hoping that we wouldn't be caught. Her voice softens with the quiet reverence of the journey. And in the end, after all the pain, after all the loss, I found freedom. I made it to a neighboring country. I was taken in by believers, by strangers who welcomed me and cared for me. And for the first time in my life, I could speak his name aloud. I could worship without fear. Life after escape was not easy. In fact, it was the hardest I had ever known. I had nothing. No documents. No identity. No home. I was branded an apostate, a traitor to my family, to my country. But in my heart, I had something far more valuable than anything this world could offer. I had Jesus. Her voice is calm, but there is a fire behind her words. I applied for asylum in a Western country. It took 18 long months, months that felt like a prison of their own. During those months, I lived in a small room, no bigger than a cell. Every night, I had nightmares. I dreamt of being dragged back home, of my father shouting, "Kill her, she is dead to us." The pain, the fear, it was overwhelming. Her voice falters slightly, but she quickly regains composure. There was a time when I almost gave up. I found a broken mirror and held it to my wrist. For a moment, I thought it would be easier to just end it all. But then, As if in answer to my silent cry, I heard it. A song, faint but clear, coming from a nearby room. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Her voice cracks with emotion as she recalls the moment that changed everything. It was like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone, that Jesus was with me. I dropped the mirror and collapsed to the ground, sobbing. He was there. In that moment of despair, he held me. Amira pauses for a moment, her breath steadying as she moves to the final part of her journey. Finally, after all those months, I was granted asylum. I boarded a plane and left the Middle East behind. I remember looking out the airplane window, whispering, "Jesus, we made it." I had no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time in my life, I was free. Her voice softens, filled with a quiet gratitude. I arrived in my new country with nothing but the clothes on my back and a Bible in my hands, but I had something far more precious: my faith, my freedom in Christ. She pauses again, the weight of her journey clear in her words. But freedom came with a price I still pay. My family thinks I'm dead. They mourn me as if I no longer exist. A part of me still aches for them, for the love I lost. But in Christ, I found a new family, a new identity, a new life. Her voice is filled with resolve, a powerful testimony of her faith. Jesus gave me a new name. He calls me daughter. He calls me beloved. And that is worth everything. Amira's voice grows stronger, filled with the hope that carries her forward. Today, I serve in a small Arabic-speaking church, a community of believers who have suffered as I have, who have paid the price of following Christ in places where it costs everything. I tell my story not for attention, but for truth. There are others like me, hidden, terrified, dreaming of Jesus, waking up in fear, longing for his love and his hope. Her voice now carries an urgent call to action. If you are watching this, and you've never counted the cost of following Jesus, I urge you to ask yourself, would you still believe if it cost you everything? Because for me, it did. And still, I say, Jesus is Lord. Jesus is worth it. Jesus is my life. Her voice softens again, filled with quiet strength. And though I walk with wounds that will never fully heal on this side of heaven, I walk with hope, because one day I will see him again, not in a dream, but face to face. And he will wipe away every tear I shed in the basement, in the desert, in the dark. Until that day, I will not be silent. I will not bow to fear. I will live as one who was once lost, but now is found. She concludes, her voice filled with deep conviction and peace. Thank you for listening to my story. I pray it brings you hope. And if you are someone who feels lost, know this: Jesus is real. He sees you. He loves you. And he is waiting for you, no matter where you are. If this message touched your heart, share it with others. There are countless people out there like me, suffering in silence, waiting for someone to show them the way to the truth. The harvest is coming, and the time is now. She smiles gently, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. God bless you.